octave given to each one of the great galaxies or universes out there. That would also be a way of distinguishing them, giving individuality, and of course, with God, that would be certainly possible.
Well, that's interesting. I've never thought of it in those terms, but I think I can see where you're coming from, Hal.
Yeah. Well, for our purposes, we're going to refer to each one of those 12 notes as densities.
Densities, okay.
That is, the note of C is more dense than is D, E, F, G, and so forth and so on, which get lighter and higher frequencies. Okay, the densities actually appear in the world, and it's not too much. For example, let me give you what is being said about that.
All right, Hal, I'm going to ask you, this is getting very interesting, and I want to hear more, but we're getting almost to our 15-minute segment.
All right,
so
good.
I'm hoping that we can pick this back up, this very interesting topic, when we get back.
We'll
be back in just a few minutes, and we'll continue. Thank you so much for watching so far, and we look forward to coming back shortly. Hello there, again this is Keith Dennis. Welcome to our second segment of a program we call Off the Beaten Track. I'm speaking with Hal Meier, the producer of the show, and we've been talking about a show calling So Where is Heaven After All? And again, we've had a wonderful discussion so far. Hal, can you bring us back up to speed as to where we go? Maybe give us a little sum of where we've been so far?
Yeah, let's take a look at the octaves that we were discussing earlier. Maybe we can bring that up and show it to our audience. These octaves correspond, these notes in the octave correspond, according to our theories, correspond to levels of reality. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, I mean that, for example, in note 1, C, the note of C, let that stand for rocks. Okay? Rocks are quite different from anything else that you're aware of, and there is only one dimension. Rocks tend to be stuck in one place. Isn't that not true? And so the rock, let's say the rock is the first density and of all creation. It's a mineral, of course. But what is then density 2? Well, the theory here is that that represents plants and animals. Plants and animals. Now you're in another level of reality. They're quite different. They are, but they're still physical. And density 3 is, by contrast, human. Now, humans are different from the preceding two, and they are, of course, still part of the physical world. But as soon as you want to go beyond density 3, you're where? Maybe you're talking now about the near-death experience and a level of reality which is out there. It's different. It has a different kind of a time, handles time differently.
Okay, now you've said an awful lot. I want to make sure I get this clear. Now, if I understand you right, Hal, you're relating these things to this scale, the octave that we showed earlier, and if I'm understanding you right, these various different densities of a rock or or a human being or perhaps an after-death experience kind of relates to perhaps the overtones, the harmonics that are made up in the octave that makes up this 144.
They are certainly different frequencies of sound. And just like the rock cannot see the plant or the animal, so also humans cannot see the next density which is beyond us, because it is vibrating at a different speed. And that vibration can be a very subtle thing. It can be a matter of within any particular single note, let's say D, E, F, any one of those. For any particular single note, there are, they say, at least 12 small variations, and by which we mean one of the harmonics that make up that note. Yes. Mm-hmm. Have you been interested in harmonics as a?
Well, I've taken a few music courses over my lifetime, but I find it very interesting how when you actually visualize the harmonics, how many different levels and what can be seen when you actually lay a sound onto a spectrograph.
What
where
is
you can
seen?
visually.
I'm curious.
What's that?
What is seen?
Well, you see the harmonics that come from whichever instrument is playing, but you also see a lot of space. We think of it being solid sound. But really, when you play a solid sound, and if you put it on a graph that actually is a spectrogram, where you actually visually see what's happening, there's a lot of little holes. There's holes, there's spaces in between pitches that make up the harmonics. Very interesting. Just very interesting.
It is very interesting, and I thank you for helping with that. In our particular point of view, the people who are talking about this say that there will be a time when we too are at the end of our third density. We've gone through the harmonics of the third density. We're at the end now, and we're ready to graduate, so to speak, to the fourth. And in fact, we're going to graduate, according to them, to the end of the fourth density. And what will that be? Well, it'll be 4.10, 11, or 12, or something like that, just in front of and ready to go into a fifth density. It looks like the fourth density is some sort of a transition period, and that the fifth density then will take off after that.
Well, Hal, what's the difference between density and dimension?
Okay, that good question, and they've often been used simultaneously, but the easiest way to explain it is this: if a density is or example, we're now in the third density. Third density happens to also have 3 dimensions. And the dimensions are the 3 that make up a cube: length, breadth, and width. Okay? And those are the only dimensions we know. If you go to the fourth or fifth density, you now jump to 6 dimensions, because it's breadth, width, depth, and 3 variations of time: forward, backward, and sideways. So you can have so that they should not be used simultaneously, but because they're so close in concept, and because they track each other to some extent, that they're often confused. Well, okay, what then? What reason do we have to believe? Who's in these other densities? Okay?
That's a good question.
Actually, I don't know either, but we have to make some provision. Aren't you a little bit curious to know where it is that Michael and Gabriel are? and the seraphim and the cherubim? And wouldn't you be curious, how about the Ancient of Days? What about all the so-called extraterrestrials that are supposed to be out there? Where are these people? Because, and that's part of the answer to where is heaven? Because they're in the same heaven or different heavens and in different galaxies and universes. Now, you see, all of a sudden this has become more of a problem. Now we can't just so easily say heaven is that far off the ground, because there are different densities, perhaps different universes that we have to account for. All right. So in a world like that, this is we realize that we have not solved all our problems yet. Well, for example, let's just say, for argument's sake, that we will learn to go from third to fourth and then eventually a fifth density. Who's in the fifth density? Well, I'd be glad to tell you, as a matter of fact. There are people who say, well, I know who's in the fifth density. There are extraterrestrials who are buzzing around the moon and around Washington, D.C. and a variety of other places. These extraterrestrials are fifth dimensional beings, which is why when they want to disappear, they can do so, because they're operating mostly at different levels of reality and can control your mind and just shut off your insight into that level of being.
Okay. Hal, if I can get you again for the people that may have just been joining. Well, right. For the people that may be just joining us, as you talk about these things, can you refer to a few individuals that may be useful to know where this information is coming from, some of the experts that you've been consulting? If you can just kind of share again who these folks are, I think it would be useful for people just joining us.
Well, the beginning for me were the people who talked about near-death experience, and that was in the first place Raymond Moody, and in the second place dozens of other people, including Van Til, as I recall, and I have some of the books with me, but it is now an unending number of people who have talked about the near-death experience. Dr. Alexander, I think, being one of the proof of heaven, being one of the most recent ones. This is so that was the beginning for me, and then people began to, first physicians and psychiatrists and that kind of personality began to look into this. And then finally, a variety of other people arrived who said, you know, I can think I can do better. I can look into the spiritual world, and I'll tell you some more about it. And then you get into a variety of people and I'm very fond of, for example, of a fellow by the name of Drunvalo Melchizedek, who has an unusual background in history. A fellow by the name of Bashar, who is definitely not of this world, and he is channeled here by Daryl Anka. And let me